Hi everyone. Today I'm going to tell you about a very interesting and unusual automotive troubleshooting exercise I recently performed on my 2004 Pontiac Grand Prix. You'll notice that we're looking at the starter here, and I promise we'll get to the reason why in a few minutes, but a little bit of a backstory first. I recently changed the front brake pads on my Pontiac Grand Prix, and when I was taking the vehicle out for a shakedown after replacing the brake pads, I noticed I had a strange clinking sound coming from my front end, but it would only occur when I would make right turns. When I was going straight or I was going left, it wouldn't do that. So I did the obvious things. I jacked up the right tire off the ground, spun it, didn't hear any sound spinning the tire forward, didn't hear any sound spinning the tire backwards. So I jacked the driver's side tire off the ground, did the same thing, no sound. Then I jacked both wheels off the ground, put the car in gear, and got it up to about 40 miles an hour and still didn't hear any sound. And so I started switching the tires from front to rear, no change in sound. I even went so far as to take the brake pads off and put the original ones back on, and still it was making the sound. So I kind of just ignored it for a little while, probably for about a month. And then I was pulling into my friend's driveway. I was backing in, and he has a pretty steep, in this case uphill, driveway. And when I was backing in, I started hearing the sound while the car was in park. And to me, it almost sounded a little bit like the starter engaging. So I'm going to show you what I found. I'm going to pick up the starter, and you'll notice this is the pinion. So for those of you who aren't familiar, what happens is when you go to crank the engine, the pinion pushes out from the solenoid there, and it will push the pinion into the flywheel so that the pinion can spin the flywheel and crank the engine. And we'll just take a look at what happens here. Watch this. So this pinion just moves freely for seemingly no reason. You may be asking yourself, well, how does that explain the noise that you were getting? Believe it or not, what was happening was, and this is the orientation that the starter is in the vehicle itself. So whenever I would make a right turn, centrifugal force would push the pinion out, and it would bang into the flywheel, and every time it would hit the flywheel would spit it back out. But because I'm still turning, centrifugal force would push the pinion back into the flywheel, and it would go in and out until I straightened the vehicle out. And that's what caused the problem. I replaced the starter with a new one, and the problem went away. So if you're having a clinking sound coming from your front end, it may be worth looking at the starter. I'm going to probably take this apart and see if we can figure out what the actual problem was, so just bear with me for a second. Alright, I think I might have found the problem. So I have the whole thing disassembled. This is your solenoid, and then this is the plunger that moves in and out of it. And you can see that there's quite a hell of a lot of spring force there. That's your planetary gear reduction. That's the rotor of the motor itself. This is your nose. As far as I can tell, based on my disassembly, it looks like, well, this lever here goes in and out, and this is what actually pushes the pinion in and out when the solenoid comes in and out. So in other words, this would go in there like that, right? So it would move back and forth. So as far as I can tell, you can very easily push the gear out, but I think what happened was, if you look here, there was a flange on the back of this mechanism here, and it looks like it just broke off. So in other words, when this would retract, there was nothing to pull the pinion back in. And that's pretty much it. What does this have to do with brakes? Well, absolutely nothing at all. It just happened to be that because I just did brakes, I was driving around with the radio off and very carefully listening with my ears, and then I noticed this sound. So, just to wrap things up, if you have a noise from your front end and it only happens when you're moving, and it only happens when you're making a turn in a certain direction, check your starter out. You never know. This starter was still working. It would still crank the engine just fine. The only problem with it was this piece broke off, and the pinion was just sliding around due to centrifugal force and caused this weird clinking sound. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hi, me again. I just wanted to leave you with one final thought before I forgot. There's a reason that I bring up brakes here. A colleague of mine whom I've learned a lot from, and if you're watching, you know who you are. Thank you for everything I've learned from you and continue to learn from you. Whenever you have a problem, no matter what the problem is, and no matter what the problem is on, the first thing you should always ask yourself is, where were the humans last? 90% of the time, my experience has taught me, 90% of the time, the problem is the last thing that somebody touched. So naturally, I would suspect the last thing that I touched being the brakes, and the noise coming from the front end, it seemed to reason that the brakes were the reason for the problem. This is one of the very, very few exceptions where that was not the case. Again, thank you very much for watching.